Hi, everyone. This is Dan Bressler from the Autism Resource Center at Options and Advocacy for McHenry County. And today I want to spend a few minutes talking about reinforcement and just sort of a crash course in reinforcement basics. So, reinforcement is all about rewarding direction following or on task behavior, doing schoolwork at home, those sorts of things. So, first, we'll start by talking about what is reinforcement. Reinforcement is just a consequence to a behavior that increases the likelihood that that behavior is going to be repeated in the future, or that it'll increase in future frequency is another way of saying that. So the easiest way to think about reinforcement is to just think about the behaviors that you engage with or engage in on a daily basis. So when we go to work, for example, we're reinforced by getting paid. When you buckle your seatbelt in a car, you're reinforced by safety, but actually car manufacturers and regulators found that that wasn't reinforcing enough to actually make people use their seatbelts. And so that's why you have that little dinging sound in your car when you aren't wearing your seatbelt, because actually when you wear your seatbelt, you're reinforced by not hearing that dinging. So that's actually called negative reinforcement, because it's taking something away while increasing future frequency of the behavior. So that's negative reinforcement. When you work out or exercise, there's a lot of different possible reinforcers. A lot of people have different reasons for doing that. You might get stress relief, you get an endorphin release in your brain. You might experience physical changes that you like in terms of how your body looks. You might feel more fit or have more energy during the day. There are a lot of different reinforcements for working out. But the important thing to remember about reinforcement is that it has to be proportional to the perceived difficulty of the work, which is why, for example, for some of us, all of those reinforcements that I just talked about for working out are enough to make us work out. And if you're a little bit more like me, that's not quite as reinforcing as the perceived difficulty of the job. So while some people feel very reinforced by running, for example, they really feel that endorphin hit, or they really like how it makes them feel. They get really reinforced by that. Others of us just experience pain when we run. And so we might not actually engage in that behavior because the reinforcement is not proportional to the perceived difficulty of the work. And the perceived difficulty of the work is going to be different from person to person. And so that's why the exact same reinforcement might not work across the board for every person. Every person is going to need a little bit of a different reinforcement system to work out for them. So what are the different types of reinforcement? One of the most common and easiest types of reinforcement to give out is a verbal reinforcement or social reinforcement. So that can be verbal praise. Hey, thanks for doing that. You're being really helpful. Nice job. Maybe a high five, a fist bump, things like that can be really easy reinforcement to give out as somebody is working or engaged in whatever behavior you like, because you don't have to have anything with you. You don't have to give anything away. It's just really quick and easy. There's also tangible reinforcements or activity reinforcements. So that could be something like favorite food or a treat. So maybe, after you go for a run, you reinforce yourself with a piece of chocolate or a bowl of pasta or something. Just something that you like. So food can work for our kids. A favorite toy might work. So, hey, if you work on schoolwork for 20 minutes, you can have 5 minutes on the iPad. That can be a really strong reinforcer for some people. There's also access to activities, TV, YouTube, whatever other activities kids really enjoy. There's also token or symbolic systems of reinforcement, and that's a reinforcement system where you're using an object or something to represent a future reinforcer. So we see this a lot with token charts. So you earn 5 Velcro tokens, and then you actually get what you were working for. But it's just a way to kind of break that down into smaller chunks and reinforce somebody more frequently as they work. In real life, actually, money is a token reinforcer, because getting a $5 bill doesn't actually do anything for us. That just represents something that we're going to buy in the future with it that will actually be reinforcing for us. And then, like we talked about with the seatbelts, there's negative reinforcement. So that's where taking something away in response to a behavior increases the likelihood of that behavior. So when we buckle our seatbelt, the annoying dinging sound goes away, and that increases the likelihood that we're going to continue buckling our seatbelt in the future. It's important to note, though, that if we're pairing appropriately, and if you're not sure what that means, go back on the Options in Advocacy YouTube channel and check out our video on pairing. If we're pairing appropriately, getting away from us shouldn't be reinforcing. So if we feel tempted to set up a reinforcement system where they're working for a break from our existence in the same room or in the same space or whatever, that may be a sign that we need to work a little bit more on developing a positive relationship, because we should be ideally a reinforcing thing ourselves, not something to get away from. So that's something to keep in mind, but it could be working for a break from schoolwork. So maybe, you work for 20 minutes or work for 5 tokens or whatever. And ultimately what you earn is a 5-minute break from work where you can play a game with mom or dad or something like that. So I want to talk a little bit more about token systems, because this is one of the most frequently talked about reinforcement systems when we're looking at kids with autism in school or at home. And although we talk about it a lot, it's a little bit more complex. So I think it's worth diving into a little bit deeper. So token systems are a really good way to have mini reinforcement without disrupting somebody's workflow. So for example, if your student or a child is doing a math worksheet at home, you don't want to have them do work for 30 seconds on one math problem, for example, or 2 minutes or whatever it is, on one math problem, and then have to stop work completely so that they can have 30 seconds with the iPad or something. That can be really cumbersome to go back and forth like that. So instead, we might use a token system where for each math problem they finish, they get a token. And once they've earned 5 tokens or 10 tokens or something like that, then they get sort of a larger break with that iPad, so that you're still able to reinforce them for doing the work as they do it gradually over time. But then the payoff is still a significant, substantial reinforcer. So tokens are earned for expected or desired behaviors. And in general, this is a generalization and varies from system to system. But in general, the consequence of off-task behavior or undesired behavior or not doing the work is that you just don't earn tokens right then. In general, if you're designing a reinforcement system for your child without consulting a behavior expert, you don't want to be taking away tokens that have been previously earned for off-task behavior. So if your child is, again, working on a math worksheet and they do 2 math problems, so they've earned 2 tokens, and then instead of doing what you expect them to do and going on to that 3rd math problem, they get up from the work table and climb on the couch and jump off of it. Your default should not be to remove the tokens that they've already earned for that. That just means that they aren't earning any tokens right now. So it's going to take longer for them to get what they're working for. Like I said, there are variations to that system. There are some systems where you would remove tokens, but I would strongly suggest that you not do that unless you're consulting directly with an applied behavior analyst or similar behavioral expert. So the frequency of tokens, how often we're giving tokens, should be based on the difficulty of the task, the number of tokens needed to earn the ultimate reinforcer, and the magnitude or significance of the reinforcer. So, for example, if you're working on a math worksheet, I don't know why that's my go-to today, but if you're working on a math worksheet and the problems are pretty easy for the student, maybe you don't need to be giving tokens every single problem, but maybe you do it, on average every 3 problems. And that also would be not only changed by the difficulty of the math work, but also by the number of tokens needed to earn the reinforcer. So if you only need 5 tokens to earn the reinforcement, you are going to award the tokens less frequently maybe than if if you need to earn 10 tokens or 15 tokens or 20 tokens, because then you're able to give them for smaller increments of work in order to earn that reinforcer for the same amount of total work. So if you have a 20 problem worksheet and you want them to complete the whole worksheet in order to earn the final reinforcer, if they have to earn 5 tokens for that reinforcer, well, then you're going to need to keep it to an average of 1 for every 4 math problems, because then they will have earned those 5 tokens at the end of the 20 problem worksheet. Whereas if you have 10 tokens, you can go down to an average of every 2 math problems. But designing these systems isn't just based on that sort of math calculation of, well, I want them to do a 50 problem worksheet before they get 5 minutes with the iPad. You also have to take into consideration, is that final reinforcer going to be reinforcing enough to justify them to do the work? So for example, they may be willing to do that work if it's 10 math problems for 5 minutes with the iPad, but if it's 50 math problems for 5 minutes with the iPad, that's a very different situation, and that may not be worth it to them. And that's when we'll start seeing those off-task behaviors more frequently. So if your child is off-task, it probably means one of 3 things or some combination. The task is perceived by them to be too difficult. Tokens aren't being awarded often or consistently enough. Or the ultimate reinforcer, the thing that they're earning with their tokens, is not worth the amount of effort needed to complete the task. So going back to the exercise example, I'm not a big runner because I perceive that task to be too difficult. I don't get tokens for running, sadly. Maybe if somebody ran alongside me and gave me, 50 cents for every quarter mile or something, I'd be more motivated. I'm not sure. And ultimately, I don't experience the reinforcers that some people report experiencing from running, right? Some people report just feeling great after a run or feeling really energized the next day or something like that. I don't experience that enough. I don't experience that very much. So the ultimate reinforcer for me doesn't sort of line up with the amount of effort or the amount of work or the difficulty of that task for me. So if the expected behavior is running, it turns out that I'm off task almost all the time unless something's chasing me, because the reinforcement calculation just doesn't work out for me enough to change my behavior. So here are some examples of a couple of different token systems. You can see on the left here, it's just a simple checkmark system. So they've made they've kind of printed out a sheet and laminated it so that they can then use dry or wet erase marker to make check marks for the tokens. And it says, after 4 check marks, a filled in row, I will earn the reward. So you can see that top row, they're earning drawing time. Then after that, they're earning a mint. Then after that, they're earning a call or note to mom. And then after that, they're earning something from the treasure box. So that's a school system. You can also see on the right, this is a really, really standard layout for a token system. You can see that it says what they're working for on top. I always think that that's really helpful as a way to sort of remind students what they're working for, especially if they're new to token systems. It's not always very intuitive, so it's helpful to have that there. And then you can see there's 5 spots for those tokens to be moved to as they complete the work. And generally in that sort of system, the child would be the one choosing what they want to work for. So you might have a board of options of reinforcing things for them. And before you even start the work, you'll say, hey, what do you want to work for this time? Should we work for the computer? Should we work to do a puzzle? Should we work for a snack? They'll choose, and then you can get right to work. So then after you complete those 5 tokens, they earn their reinforcement. Those tokens are reset, so it's an empty board, and they can re-choose what they're going to work for next. So here's some final thoughts just to wrap us up for the day here. Some things to begin to consider. What are you asking your child to do? We need to know that, because if we aren't really sure what we're asking them to do, then they're not going to be sure either. And consider how you're communicating that expectation to them. A lot of us, without realizing it, can communicate our expectations in sort of indirect or abstract ways, because oftentimes we just expect people to know what the expected behavior in a particular situation is. So we may think that it's very expected that everybody walk calmly in the store rather than running or hopping or jumping or spinning or whatever. But while that expectation is maybe intuitive to us, it's not intuitive to everybody, especially for people with autism. So it's important that we're communicating those expectations clearly, that we're outlining exactly what behaviors we want to see from our children, so that they at least know what they're supposed to be trying to do and how they can earn the reinforcement that we're laying out for them. So that might be simple verbal statements. If your child has strong receptive language skills, receptive auditory language skills, we might write a list of rules. Maybe we'll make 3 expected behaviors for remote learning at home. And maybe behavior 1 is, ask for help if you need it. And maybe rule 2 is sit at the table until learning time is over. And maybe rule 3 is, only go on school-related websites during learning time. And so then maybe every few minutes we're going to check in with those rules. And if we're following all those rules, boom, token. Or if we're following all those rules after 5 minutes, awesome. Hey, you were in 2 minutes with the iPad. Nice job. Another thing to consider is, how is your child being rewarded for doing what's expected? And is that worth it for them? From their perspective, is it worth it? This is very different. Thinking about reinforcement in this way is very different from the way that many of us were raised. And so it's not always natural for us to think about things in this way, because a lot of times we sort of fall into this thinking trap of, well, that's just what they're supposed to be doing. They shouldn't earn anything for just doing the bare minimum, just doing what they're supposed to be doing. But although that's a really common thinking trap that we all fall into sometimes, ultimately it's not going to help move us in the direction that we want to go. As long as we get stuck thinking in that way, we're probably not going to see an increase in the behaviors that we're looking for from our students. So it's important to start shifting our thinking to what is this reinforcement? What are our children earning, or how are they being rewarded for doing what's expected? Because many children are not just rewarded intrinsically by knowing that they've done the right thing. So we need to look for some more external reinforcers to help bridge that gap. And then finally, how can you add structure to reinforcement? So for some people, it won't be enough to say, hey, if you do a good job on your remote learning today, we will take a trip to the park. That might not be structured and concrete enough for them to know what to do and for it to really work out. They might not know what it means to do a good job with their remote learning today. They might not know how long do they need to do a good job with their remote learning today. And so those questions are often answered by bringing in visuals and tokens. You can look at doing a behavior contract where we are outlining those rules with really specific criterion. So, defining the amount of time, maybe adding a visual timer to that situation as they go so they can see how close they are to the end. Any opportunity that you can find to add structure and predictability and make abstract concepts concrete are going to be beneficial in terms of increasing the behaviors that we want to see. So I hope that is a helpful reinforcement crash course for you. If you do have any questions about reinforcement or are looking for some help designing a reinforcement system for your child, you can leave a comment in the comments below on this YouTube video, or you can reach out directly to your Options and Advocacy Service Coordinator. We're always happy to help you. And it's also a good idea to maybe go back to some of our older videos on pairing and catch goods and some of these other behavioral concepts, because all of these put together are what is really going to help improve your situation. Taking one idea and only implementing that idea is not going to be as successful as sort of combining all of these ideas. So I hope that was helpful, and have a great day.